Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's live webinar with the Tenant Farmers Association. And tonight we are delighted to welcome Jim Mosley. Jim is the Chief Executive of Red Tractor Assurance and will be our guest speaker this evening. The title for our webinar this evening is "What Benefit is Red Tractor to British Farmers and Growers?" So while we have people starting to join us this evening, I wish to introduce myself. My name is Robert Martin, and I've just taken over as the new National Chair of the TFA. And this evening's event is kindly sponsored by Roythorns Solicitors. Roythorns have kindly agreed to support the next 12 months of TFA virtual events, as well as other TFA digital knowledge share content. Roythorns is a national law firm steeped in agriculture. They have 90 years experience advising landowners and tenants alike. Their lawyers are active in farm tenancy policy groups, and they get the bigger picture. So whether it's succession planning, under an AHA holding or through an FBT, a dispute with your landlord, or a share farm agreement, or even something to do with natural capital agreement, Roythorns will be there to help you with their advice and to assist you through the whole process. Tonight's webinar will be recorded, and once edited will be available on the TFA YouTube channel. To find our channel, go onto YouTube and search at Tenant Farmers. Our video library features all our past virtual events, knowledge share, teachings, and news snippets. We encourage you to pay it a visit and subscribe to the channel, and then you can be notified when we upload new content. The top content of the past few months has been looking at DEFRA, the ELMS and SFI updates, reimagining the landlord-tenant relationship in agriculture, Dartmoor review, and looking for new tenants making your way and applying for your tenancy application. And a really important one recently where we did delving deeper into the soil carbon issues. So moving on to tonight's webinar, as I've said earlier, we have Jim Mosley. Jim has spent his whole career in the food and drink industry. Since 2017, he's been the Chief Executive of Red Tractor. He held senior positions with FMC and Wonder Foods before being appointed Sales and Marketing Director at Tulip International, where I spent 14 years. He has been appointed Managing Director of Mills for UK, Ireland and Nordic region, managing a substantial portfolio of world-leading food business, including Häagen-Dazs, Old El Paso and Nature Valley. Jim has served as Chairman of the Provision Trade Federation and President of the Food and Drink Federation, is a member of the Trade and Agriculture Commission and assists with Food Drink Export Council. So once we've had our presentation from Jim this evening, that will lead us nicely into a live question and answer portion. And we've had a lot of questions come in over the last week to 10 days, and quite a number have landed in today to make the shortlist as we come and question Jim on where we go forward with Red Tractor. So I think what I will do is I will hand over to Jim now, please, for your presentation before we come back to question and answers. So Jim, thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for that introduction as well, which I have to say made me feel quite old. Some of those companies and positions you mentioned do go back a rather long way, but there you are. So listen, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to talk to all of you this evening. George actually gave me a bit of briefing coming into this. So although the webinar is titled "What Benefit is Red Tractor?", I know that George was also keen for me to talk about the recent governance review at Red Tractor and also the Greener Farm Commitment, the environmental module that we were developing but stopped just a few weeks ago. So Hopefully my presentation will cover all of that. Let me just bring it up on screen and make sure that you can see it. So as said, I want to run through just a little bit of history and purpose of Red Tractor. Whilst I've been in Red Tractor for 2017, it started in 2000, and I'm actually quite surprised at the number of people that I talk to who perhaps don't know the origins of Red Tractor. So I thought I'd spend one slide on at least the history and the purpose. I'll talk through the benefits, and then I'll talk specifically the governance and the Greener Farms commitment. So hopefully covering all of the ground I was asked to do. So let me start off by saying that Red Tractor was actually established way back in 2000. In fact, at exactly the same year as the Food Standards Agency was developed. And at the time, its purpose was to restore consumer confidence in UK-produced food. And perhaps for the more experienced people on the call, Robert, you might remember that particularly through the 90s, primary agriculture didn't have the greatest of times. So we had quite a few food scares, particularly BSE and Salmonella, but there was also issues around pesticide residues. And we, in fact, had foot and mouth in 2000. And as a consequence of that, number one, the confidence amongst British consumers was probably at an all-time low. But of course, as a lot of people will know, we also lost the vast majority of our export contracts at that time as well. So I wanted to look at the original purpose. And doing this, I also wanted to make sure that I didn't lie at all. So I'm actually on the right-hand side of this slide. You probably won't be able to read all the detail, but it's actually the BBC News coverage of the launch of Red Tractor on the 13th of June 2000. But on the left-hand side of the slide, I've just pulled out some of the key things that were in that release, because I think it says a lot about Red Tractor, what we do and where we've come from. So for an industry that suffered numerous food scares, the new scheme provides the opportunity to reassure consumers that what they're buying is safe. And I stress that because that has been the purpose of Red Tractor since day one and remains the purpose today. All meat, this just gives you an example of where we were covering, the areas we covered. So as well as safety in the first block, all meat displaying the logo will have met strict hygiene, animal welfare and environmental standards. So lots of people talk to me about environment and whether it's Red Tractor's remit. It has been there since day one. And further down, a really interesting paragraph given where we are today. So farmers believe it is a chance for them to promote the high quality of British produce compared with foreign food, which may be cheaper, but is often produced to lower standards. And, you know, here we are facing into lots of international trade deals, which may well increase the competition in Britain. And again, we have this issue of our standards versus imported. And then the last point, which is also, I think, really key, is that the idea is that food displaying the logo will eventually become seen as a kind of brand which consumers would recognize and trust. So that all goes back to June in 2000, but I think absolutely applies to everything that Red Tractor does and has been doing. So if I come more up to date, so 24 years on, where are we today? Well, the first thing is that against the core purpose that Red Tractor was set up to do, we've, in some respects, excelled. And I don't put all of the responsibility of that down to Red Tractor. The whole industry, I think, has rallied round, and it has changed consumer perception in British food quite dramatically. And I know we rarely do it as an industry, but actually when you look at where we were and where we are today, I personally think the whole industry needs to congratulate itself on changing those consumer perceptions. So we run a very big study through one of the most respected research companies, YouGov. And I can tell you today that UK produced food is trusted more than any other imported product. Consumers will always trust UK produced food first. And the reason that they do that is because of the legislation and the standards to which that product is produced in the UK. We ourselves, Red Tractor, the mark, the logo that sits on the product, enjoys 78% consumer awareness. In other words, if you ask 100% of consumers whether they recognize Red Tractor, 78 say they do. But really important, 74% of them trust the Red Tractor. And indeed, Red Tractor is the most trusted of all UK marks. And I stress that because, interestingly, you know, we're up against RSPCA and the Soil Association, which could be considered as very worthy marks. And yet Red Tractor has considerably more trust even than them. And at the moment, and at cost, not at retail, but at cost levels, the logo is appearing on around £18 billion worth of UK food and drink. So that's how we've kind of moved on against that original purpose of reassuring consumers. Something that I'm sure will come up in the questions, Robert, but as a consequence of Red Tractor having a successful scheme, lots of end customers, the supermarkets, the restaurants, brands, processors, packers, etc., insist on Red Tractor in their buying specification, but they also adopt what I would describe as a British first, or indeed in some instances, a British only policy. In other words, I think because of the standards to which we produce to, our customers will always favour and look to the UK as the first point of supply. They may still bring in other products and imports for availability and price, but my sense is they are very, very supportive of British, but for good reason, because those standards sit behind it. Most of them feature the logo on packaging and in store on fascia and such like, and use it for exports. We are well aware that there are two retailers who don't use the logo, which is Sainsbury and Marks and Spencer's, and we are constantly working hard to try to bring those two on board. Then the third element is that Red Tractor is also valued by government. So government recognises the value Red Tractor brings, and it, in return, if you like, provides what we call earned recognition to Red Tractor farmers. Now, I'm not going to go through every agreement, but we have about 6 or 7 different agreements with the Food Standards Agency and different other government bodies, which result in, if you're a Red Tractor farmer, you will get less government inspection than otherwise, which I think is an important factor. And then the European Commission recently approved Red Tractor grain for biofuels. So even at the European level, we're getting good recognition. So what does that mean for farmers? Well, I think the first thing is that on the left there, and we may take it for granted now, but we shouldn't do if we think where we came from in the 90s, is that we have consumer demand for British Red Tractor product. And that's crucial, because if you've got that demand, you have a market for your produce. But also through the logo, we have differentiation. So Red Tractor can differentiate itself from the competitive set on the shelf. Because it's required by so many customers, it gives farmers, if you like, the maximum market access for the minimum audit. I'm positive that the farmers on this call, Robert, will say, it's not minimum audit, I've constantly being audited, there's far too much duplication and so on, which I understand. But at the end of the day, that Red Tractor audit and Red Tractor certification does give the producer access to virtually every market, domestic and export. And because of the value by government, it does mean that we get less government audits and indeed wider markets, because it is used in a lot of instances for export as well. So I think on a single page, and I will come back to this page right at the end of the presentation as well, Robert, just to finish on it. But I think this page kind of encapsulates the chief benefits of Red Tractor to farmers. It's that customer demand, maximum market access for minimum audit, and less government audits and the widest possible market. That said, and I've probably painted a very good picture of Red Tractor in the first couple of slides, but that said, we, and of course every organization, can always improve what we do. And the things that we've got absolutely in kind of in the sights at the moment is, number one, trying to reduce the audit burden and certainly the duplication in the supply chain. I think some people on the call may have seen that. If you were a fresh produce supplier and you used to supply Tesco and you had to go through Nurture, when Nurture's disappeared, you only need Red Tractor Assurance to supply. And similarly, if you're in the Tesco dairy group, for example, all the Tesco inspection has disappeared in that, and everyone is using just Red Tractor for that group. So, but that's a start. There's lots to do to erode even more duplication in the chain. I think we can always provide farmers with a much greater understanding of the role and the purpose of assurance, and particularly the rationale and the process by which we develop standards. And I'm very conscious that there's sometimes a very big gap between the end market and the farmer or the producer, maybe not always aware of exactly what the market is demanding. And I think Red Tractor has a responsibility to try to bridge that gap and give a much greater rationale for what we do. Improve consumer understanding of Red Tractor. I mentioned some good figures around awareness and trust. But what we really want consumers to do is understand the real benefits of Red Tractor to strengthen that loyalty and that demand. And similarly, we want to differentiate Red Tractor even further from what we see as an increasingly competitive set. With the trade deals, it is possible that we will see much more imported competition. And I think we need something that really differentiates us from them. And the last point, we perhaps in the UK don't have the greatest of export cultures, but interestingly, our Red Tractor standards and indeed the logo can generate export opportunities because it is recognized abroad, it's seen positively, and we have protected the trademark and the logo in lots of international markets to enable AHDB and our processors to really utilize that and export more. However, all of that said, we're well aware that some farmers, probably the majority would be in the beef and lamb and crop sector, are not happy with Red Tractor and assurance in generally. And I think the reasons that we typically hear is there's too much audit burden, too much duplication. The standards are always increasing. They're above imports, and those imports come in without any farm assurance. There's no value from assurance, and there's a lack of consultation with farmers, and that's certainly true of the Greener Farm Commitment, the environment module that caused so much furor in the last few months. And I think that last point, if I could just play on that last point to link to governance, that lack of consultation basically drove the NFU into commissioning an independent review of Red Tractor governance. So if I just go on and look at the governance review and exactly how it was run. So whilst the NFU drove it, it was ultimately owned by all the owners of Red Tractor, which are the farming unions, AHDB, Dairy UK, and the British Retail Consortium. The agency that the NFU found was Campbell Tickell. The methodology was agreed, and that methodology was a full document review, online surveys, interviews, focus groups, everyone within the governance structure of Red Tractor, and that's just under 200 people, were involved in that methodology. The findings, the key findings from that governance review is the first point is that the Red Tractor governance is sound. So Campbell Tickell could not find any problems, and they could not find any procedural breach, particularly in relation to the events which gave rise to the decision to do the review, hence the Greener Farm Commitment. And in fact, on the Greener Farm Commitment, Campbell Tickell found that the proposals were correctly part of Red Tractor's remit, full square into what we should be doing, and the process was correctly followed. Now, that last little point, and included the NFU, who were briefed throughout, Campbell Tickell were keen to put that in the report because they were aware that there was a social media post that said the NFU were not involved in the development of the Greener Farm Commitment. And unfortunately, that was not the case. And Campbell Tickell were keen to ensure that in the report, they mentioned that the NFU were indeed briefed throughout the whole process. Some other good points. So they did recognise that Red Tractor is probably more transparent than any other assurance scheme in the UK. However, the transparent and also representative, and together, the difficulty with that is that whilst that's positive, it actually leads to a negative because Red Tractor has a very big governance structure with ownership bodies, boards, sector boards, technical advisory committees, and so on. And that leads to an enormous amount of governance complexity. And with complexity comes misunderstanding, comes mistrust, etc. So the specific recommendations that came from Campbell Tickell were, I have to say, probably largely administrative. So they said we should create and publish a governance handbook to really improve the clarity of the structure and the roles and responsibilities. We ought to introduce formal appraisals for the main board directors and indeed the sector board and committee members, which we don't have today at all. We ought to develop and adopt a board member code of conduct. And this is because Campbell Tickell recognised the problems of board directors who sit on Red Tractor as a director, but are also representing organisations where sometimes those interests are in conflict. So we needed we don't have a code of conduct at the moment, and Campbell Tickell recommended we have one of those to resolve that kind of conundrum. The big point that they made was around addressing stakeholder engagement, and by that they mean particularly re-engaging and rebuilding trust with farmers as a major priority. And they explained that, but they also interestingly said that effort by Red Tractor needs to be equally matched by the owners of Red Tractor as well. And then I put this without a number because it was mentioned a few times in the report, but it wasn't actually a physical recommendation from Campbell Tickell. But fair to say that they spotted that devolved representation is becoming increasingly important. And it's fair to say that when Red Tractor was established 24 years ago, we were national schemes. We operated nationally. But of course, in those 24 years, the devolved administrations have got stronger and stronger, and they've got different policies, different aims, and so on. And we perhaps do not have the level of devolved representation in Red Tractor, so that when we are developing a standard, let's say in dairy, which is a nationwide standard, we recognize those different policies and ambitions that sit within the devolved sector. So I thought it would be sensible, whilst we're talking governance, just to give all your members, Robert, an overview of how the structure works. And I say that partly because some of the people on the call might see that I'm once again featured in the agricultural press. But there appears to be a lot of misunderstanding as to how Red Tractor is currently structured and who does what. So in short slides, I'm just going to give you a very quick overview. So up at the top there, we have the ownership body of Red Tractor. They are the three farming unions, as you can see, AHDB, Dairy UK, and the British Retail Consortium. And their key tasks are to appoint the chair and the directors, but they delegate the running of the business to the main board. So they have very little day-to-day responsibility, although in appointing the chair and the directors, they of course have the power to sack anyone and rebuild a board of directors. But with that board, they delegate the running to the main board. And that main board is very diverse. It brings different insights and viewpoints, but it approves the vision, purpose, the strategies, the objectives, and the annual business plan. And just to give you a feel for who the board is, so each one of these 18 people on the screen are absolutely equal board directors. So we have the chair, Christine Taken, and myself as the CEO. We break agriculture into 6 different sectors, as you can see in the bottom left. And each one of those sectors has a sector director it's an advertised position. They're interviewed and such like in order to get that. Some of those sector directors are active farmers. So John Dracup, a beef and sheep farmer down in the southwest. Tim Locke is an ex-dairy farmer. Kit Patworth is combinable crops in East Anglia. Stuart Houston was a pig farmer, formerly a chair of NPA, but now an independent. Ian Gardner used to work for 4 Farmers, and Lucy McLennan is now a consultant in fresh produce, but used to be a fresh produce buyer in retail. And then on the right-hand side, we have the industry directors. Now, actually, farm unions, Tom, it's now moved to David Exwood. AHDB is Will Jackson, BMPA, Dean Holroyd, British Retail Consortium, Sophie Throop, and British Poultry Council is John Reed. So they're the industry directors. And that's where sometimes the problem can arise with a conflict of interest between those board directors and the organizations in which they sit. And then down in the bottom right-hand corner, we have our independent directors. Again, these are advertised positions that people have to apply for and are interviewed for. And they're a mix. So Alistair is our vice chair, a lamb farmer up in Cumbria. James Russell is the former president of the BVA, helps us on all matters veterinary. John Payne is a consumer expert working at the moment for KFC. We have Chris Goodwin, who helps us with the finance side of Red Tractor, and Guy Poppy is the ex-chief scientific officer at the Food Standards Agency. It is those 18 board directors that effectively make decisions at Red Tractor. And once those decisions have been made around whatever, including the Greener Farm commitment, it's then handed to me as the CEO to then implement that with the permanent staff. So you can see here that the board delegates down on the right-hand side the responsibility for day-to-day activity to the permanent staff. And it is me, the CEO, that interacts between the board and the staff. On the left-hand side of the chart, you can also see the board delegates the responsibilities for the development of core standards to the sector boards and the technical advisory committees. And we also have a standards committee which signs off the standards, but also agrees those standards that are common across all the different sectors. So the key thing here is that the board is absolutely critical to Red Tractor. So when someone objects to a decision being made and says that Red Tractor shouldn't have done that, it's really the board that is the focus, the 18 people in the middle there, that's the critical part. So then I just also wanted to touch on the environmental module. I was asked to talk about the Greener Farm commitments, as it's been in the news a lot in the last couple of months. And I'll start with why Red Tractor was involved. Why on earth did we look at this in the first place? And I would say that the first objective of assurance is always to deliver a common standard that effectively that meets the needs of the customers and alleviates the need for multiple programs. In 2021, once we'd finalized our version 5 standards, which is the last time that Red Tractor had a comprehensive review of its standards, the Red Tractor board realized that the market's drive to becoming more environmentally focused and more sustainable was likely to drive multiple programs. Perhaps at the simplest example, if you're a beef and lamb farmer, and you might supply 1 or 2 processors, and those processors might supply 4 or 5 retailers each, it might be possible that you as a beef and lamb farmer might be asked to do multiple carbon audits so that your beef can effectively end up in Sainsbury, Asda, Morrison's, Tesco, wherever. And we saw that that was going to be a risk, and therefore we wanted to drive something that was a common approach. So the Red Tractor board, those 18 board directors, called for the development of a bolt-on module designed to meet the needs of the market and specific aim of reducing the demands on the farmer. The board, the 18 board directors, also agreed that the governance of the module would differ from our core standards. And the reason for that is that it had to be driven by the needs of the market. If it's not delivering what all the different customers want, then it's irrelevant in some respects. It's bound to have been reviewed annually, not every 5 years, as our typical comprehensive reviews are, and it needed to be flexible enough to maintain that common industry approach. And therefore, the 18 board directors, including AHDB and NFU, agreed that it would not be consulted on. So the purpose of the module, enabling that common industry approach, striving to minimize the future demands on farmers. But for me, there's also a couple of side benefits of the module. So it would enable the product to be differentiated to the consumer. So we had a label. In fact, in the top right-hand corner of the slide, you can see the proposed label that we developed for this, which meant it could be segmented and differentiated all the way through the chain, and might have provided a mechanism for adopters to at least recover their costs. And then perhaps one more important thing is that because it would have been labelled separately, it enabled agriculture to communicate its environmental credentials and compete with competitors. I say that because my slight worry is that if retailers develop their own program, then it will be the retailers that are shouting about their environmental credentials, when in reality, it's the farmers that are doing all the hard work, and we should just remember that. For anyone that was interested, Robert and George, they're the 5 areas that the module was looking at. So carbon footprinting, soil management, nutrient management, waste and biodiversity. 3 of those areas, by the way, is already in DEFRA's SFI. And as a SFI, we would have recognized them. So no additional work for the farmer to do. But if I just look at the period between September 23 and March 24, so this might be interesting to some people on the call. In September 23, the entire board, all 18 directors, approved the rollout of the module, providing that there was greatest technical scrutiny, including the modules going in front of all the sector boards. But providing that was done, then we could potentially roll it out in 24. That was September 24, March 24. The farming unions and AHDB withdrew the support. And as a consequence of that, with the lack of support that broad, we've axed the module completely. So as far as Red Tractor is concerned, we do nothing with this module at all. It is completely dead and gone. So with that, I will just finish on the slide that I showed earlier, which brings us back perhaps to those benefits of Red Tractor. So the trust by consumers, the requirement by customers, and the value by government, and what I believe it means for farmers and in terms of where I think Red Tractor adds the value. And with that, Robert, I will close the presentation and move back to you. Do you want me to remove it from the screen?
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks for that. And then if we need to put it back up again, then we can all do that later on in our time. But thanks for your presentation there, Jim. When I go look through some of the things that you said on there, one of the major things that keeps coming back to me at the TFA is the doubling up of the audits. I have one person in for one, and they'll come and do another one and another one. And it just seems to be an absolute waste of time for the primary producer when they're given the same amount of information 4 or 5 different times. And I'm also reminded that the levy payers themselves, they were told about this, what was going to happen with the Greener Farmer Commitment by the British Retail Consortium, which really, it shouldn't have been that. They are part of the board, but I think it should have come from the farmer representatives themselves rather than from the retailer consortium. And just kind of touching on that part, actually, you said in your presentation how that you talked how the NFU had an involvement in the commitment there, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. Why do you think it was appropriate for the NFU to deny their involvement initially?
Okay, right, Robert, there's a few things there. You mentioned audit duplication, you mentioned the BRC releasing the news and the NFU. Let me try and deal with them in that order. Audit duplication, I 100% agree with you. Our aim at Red Tractor is that Red Tractor becomes the single audit. I mean, I think we have to remember that if there was no Red Tractor, then every retailer would still conduct their audits one way or the other. They'd probably do it through the independent CBs. They might do it themselves, or they'll ask their processors to do it through field representation or whatever. So I think we need to remember that the worst case scenario would be no assurance and therefore individual checks by all those customers. There is no way that a Tesco or a Sainsbury is going to sell something with its name on the pack without it fully knowing the traceability and the standards to which that product has been produced. So if Red Tractor wasn't there, they would do that due diligence another way. And I actually think that that would end up with many more audits for farmers and growers than they have today. But you're right, Robert, there is still an opportunity to replace some of that duplication. I personally think we've got some great examples in the last couple of years with Tesco and one or two others where we have removed an audit layer completely. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't go further and reduce duplication further still. Just on the audit burden, Robert, and I'm going to expand a little bit, but shout me down if I'm going too far. But I mentioned that one of the areas that we can definitely improve on is audit burden and duplication. I actually think there are ways and means of making our audit far more efficient than it is today. I personally think when I first arrived at Red Tractor, I saw the auditors are perhaps a bit old-fashioned, sending people down the track, sitting in the kitchen or the farm office, going through all the records and ticking them and whatever. I actually think there are ways and means of doing that far more efficiently than we're doing today, even via the use of API links. So if we come onto a farm and we say we need to see your crop sprayer record, there is no reason why we couldn't have got that crop sprayer record from the National Crop Spraying Centre. And so we don't need to bother the farmer. We don't need to see the fallen stock record. We can get it from the fallen stock company. Similarly, if people have had, I don't know, a TB inspection or an AFRA inspection or whatever, it might cover a lot of what Red Tractor does. But at the moment, we don't have the links to those other companies to draw that information in. So if you were to look at the Red Tractor structure, 5 years ago, there was not a single person in IT or data. Today, we have a team of 3, and they are all looking to see how we can use AI and APIs in order to draw in that data to reduce that, to make that audit far more efficient and faster. So I completely agree with you, and I think it's a great opportunity, and it is something that we are definitely working on. Coming to the Greener Farm Commitment, you're absolutely spot on, Robert. The BRC stupidly, and they know it and they've apologized, but they did a member briefing following the Red Tractor's main board meeting on the 30th of September, where approval was given to roll out the GFC. The BRC then did a briefing for its own members. It put it on its website. It should have been gated, so only the BRC members should have been able to see it, but it went public. And as a consequence of going public, and as a consequence of the wording in the release, which was not our wording at all, as a consequence of that, the NFU did come under a lot of pressure over that weekend. And you asked me about the NFU post. I personally think that was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the pressure they were getting. It was stupid because it wasn't true. But in fairness to them, 2 days later, they did come out with a release that said, yes, we have been involved, but, and then various things. The pity for Red Tractor is it never had an opportunity to be able to communicate about the Greener Farm commitment at all. But it wouldn't have also been the time to have done it. As said, the decision on the end of September is that it had to go through more technical scrutiny, and providing it came out of that okay, it might have been available in 24. So we were entering a period where we've gone into the technical scrutiny. So we weren't even ready to talk about the Greener Farm commitment. So in some respects, the communication was taken out of our hands, and it became a huge kind of explosion. So a pity, but that's the way it happened.
No, I take that on board, and say before I head back into more questions, I just want to remind everybody that's listening in tonight, please put your questions into the question box at the bottom, and we'll pick up with those as we go through the rest of this evening's proceedings. But coming back to the way things were announced to the levy payer, what concerned me was that even when we kind of thought it was consigned to the history books, the Greener Farm commitment, we had then a Christine Taken come out on Radio 4, I think it was, saying it's not a matter of if, but when it's going to come into place. Now, that really got the heckles up on the back of the levy payers, and I'm just wondering if there are lessons to be learned about the future of Red Tractor. What are those lessons for you as an organisation?
Sorry, Robert, do you mean out of the events of the GFC?
Yes, very much, because Christine came out and said, well, it's not a matter of if, but when it's going to come in. And that really got the heckles up again. Not that you could even get up anymore, but it's the fact that going forward from this point, how for the future of Red Tractor, if it does have a future, what lessons have been learned?
Well, I think the one thing that we would learn, and if I look at the poultry sector, where we've developed a real segmented offer. So in poultry, we have our core standards, we have an enhanced welfare that meets all the requirements of the Better Chicken commitment, and we have a free range label. All of that is developed within the sector. So I think the one thing that we would do next time, Robert, is what we would do is we would take this into the sectors from day one. So the board decision is that we would develop this in an in-house way. And I think the learning is we just can't do that. We're too big, too transparent. We're too important an assurance scheme to do that. We're not like a RSPCA or a leaf mark or whatever. So I think we will always have to go to consultation with anything we're proposing in the future. And the first route for that is to take it through the sector boards.
Okay, I hear you on board, Jim, there. One question I had in this morning from our member in Hampshire was, how can Red Tractor be described as voluntary when I cannot sell my grain without it?
Yes, look, I completely understand that, and I understand where the sentiment of the question is coming. But to be fair, I mean, really what's happened here is that it is a symptom of the success of Red Tractor. So Red Tractor is a voluntary scheme. It was voluntary from day one. But the problem is the good thing is because it's a good scheme and it's a comprehensive scheme, it meets the requirements from a due diligence point of view for the vast majority of end customers, retailers, caterers, brands, processors, and packers. And so it's a very simple way of those guys saying, well, Red Tractor's a really good standard. We want you to be Red Tractor assured in order to supply us. So in some respects, you can argue that Red Tractor is almost a victim of its own success, in that in some sectors, yes, it's difficult to find a market outside of being assured. And I completely accept that within grain and probably in dairy as well, there isn't much of a market outside of Red Tractor. But it's not that we're trying to close the market down or dominate it. In fact, I remember, Robert, back in the early 2000s, there was an alternative crop scheme, although I don't think it lasted that long. But so we're never afraid of competition or addition. In fact, I would completely support the area of choice. But I think by the same token, grain growers particularly need to remember that with just that one Red Tractor audit and assurance, they have access to every market. So human food, animal feed, domestic market, export market, biofuel. There's really not a single place that Red Tractor can't go, Red Tractor grain can't go. So whilst I understand the sentiment behind the question, I think the other side of the equation is that it gives you great market access.
No, I hear what you say there, Jim, and I think we would probably be here all night if we were to try to argue that one backwards and forwards. But in the essence of transparency, what stops Red Tractor from publishing all the minutes of the board and the technical subgroups for future scrutiny?
Yeah, we don't need to do that. We're not like an AHDB. We don't operate under freedom of information. In some respect, we've never actually been asked, Robert, in the 24 years we've been around to publish minutes or whatever.
Can I have them, please, Jim? I'll have them, please.
Oh, you could. Well, I think I'd have to take that to the board to ask, and I know not whether all the board directors would be happy. But remember that through the member matters, you already have the update on all the topics that are being discussed at the sector boards. So there is a regular member matter, and when the sector boards meet, and they're the real group that are developing the standards, all of that is included in an update from the sector chair in the member matters.
Because everything you were mentioned on your presentation this evening is about trust and value. And one question in from a member this evening is, what is Red Tractor doing to ensure that retailers using the Red Tractor logo are passing a fair proportion of the retail price back to the primary producer?
Yeah, and Robert, I'd be really keen to hear anyone's suggestion on exactly how we do that. I say that because, of course, we don't have a commercial relationship with a retailer. We weren't set up like a marketing board or whatever to go and negotiate and sell to retailers at all. The way that we can add value with retailers is to demonstrate the value of those standards to retailers, and also to demonstrate the value of the logo to retailers. And we do that all the time. And I think you see that already. You see a situation where, retailers will always adopt that kind of British first, or in some cases, British only. Look at Co-op and Morrison's. They have, in terms of red meat, they have a British only approach. And that is because of the standards that sit behind British. So although we don't, I have no way of kind of trying to get more cake down the supply chain and away from the retailers. But I still think that by the value that Red Tractor brings is making sure that British Red Tractor is the preferred supplier and the first one there. And look at the stats. How much grain is milled in the UK is British. It's enormous. We've got retailers selling British only red meat. So I think there's good examples of that all the way around.
Just commenting on the back of, we're talking about cereal there, we've had a question in here. Before Red Tractor existed, I had market access to feed and flour mills. Now I must have Red Tractor assurance to access both markets, but non-assured imports are accepted into these mills. If Red Tractor combinable assurance doesn't exist within the UK, the mills would likely be purchased from non-assured UK grain. So looking on there, so for best value for me, is it for Red Tractor to scrap that grain assurance so that at least we can utilise the UK non-assured grain and have a more level playing field?
Yeah, on that, first of all, I think there's a lot of responsibility placed on merchants and millers to demonstrate the safety of their grain they're buying. So if it wasn't Red Tractor, I'm sure it'd be something else. I'm sure it'd be another scheme similar to the one that launched in 2000s, or indeed the same as Scottish quality crops in Scotland, which operates just the way that Red Tractor does. So my sense is that that's it. And I think we need to remember that while imports may not be farm assured, they are still product assured, and they have to meet the safety standards required in the UK, which means a lot of testing of containers at the port and so on. But that said, Robert, I'm very open to competition and indeed farmers having choice. And I don't know if everyone is aware, but I can make this point that, you know, not that long ago, we partnered with the National Farmers Union and asked AIC to make the gatekeeper scheme, which is the scheme they use for imported product, open to UK growers. Now, they didn't at that time. We'll keep the pressure on, but very open. You know, if there is a market for non-assured and they can access that through the gatekeeper, I personally think they should have that option. And we were very public about that.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about the number of people you have working on your digital records. So why, and the question is, so why is it far easier to WhatsApp the inspector than to use your, inverted commas, useless portal?
Yeah, I think, well, our portal was actually developed, well, strange you to say it's useless because interestingly, the World Trade Organization thinks it's the best remote inspection regime that was developed through COVID. And part of that was the use of the portal. I do think we have a little bit of an issue, particularly with the older, more experienced assessors who perhaps shy away from encouraging farmers to use the portal and prefer to still do things by themselves. But we are encouraging the use of the portal. The module would have used the portal, and my sense is that that portal is going to become much more critical, particularly if we want to do the things I said we want to do in terms of improving the audit efficiency by setting up API links and so on. We need that kind of, you know, that ability for our portal to talk to other databases to reduce that burden. So I'm not sure it's useless, Robert. I haven't heard that expression used before. But yes, you're right. We need to encourage greater uptake and usage of the portal.
Okay, that's fine. Back to your point earlier, when we're looking at circa 2000, lambs were sold weekly in the local market, and Red Tractor makes no difference to price or buyers' inclination to buy. Why is that? And I caveat that one because I spoke to one of my local auctioneers today and said, who buys the non-farm assured lamb and beef? And the question and the answer came back was, we've got some of the wholesalers do, some of the butchers do, and there is no premium for a very poor farm assured carcass of lamb or beef, whereas the butchers and the wholesalers will always buy a good quality carcass, whether farm assured or not. Okay,
so look, I think it's a bit disappointing that AHDB no longer publish their market data and their annual data, because in the past, when they've looked at it over a 52-week period, typically assured does get a small premium over non-assured. We could debate whether that premium covers the on-cost for assurance and whatever, but typically it has in the past. As far as my answer to that one is concerned, is that it ultimately, being farm assured is a business decision for a lot of farmers and growers. You know, if you feel you don't need assurance because you have a route to another market that doesn't require assurance, no problem, do it. I know that there is a lot of lamb that goes into the export market or goes into the halal market that doesn't require assurance. And if farmers can take advantage of that market and they don't need to be assured, that's fine by me. For me, that's a complete business decision, Robert. So we're not, I think you probably, the NFU and maybe some other bodies would say we would like all farmers to try to get farm assured because it increases the reputation of the whole industry. But as far as I'm concerned, and particularly in the current climate where margins are so incredibly tight, I think that if a farmer or grower doesn't need to be assured to get produce to that market, then don't be assured. We're not trying to force people into assurance. But of course, there are markets which require assurance. And that, you know, in my view, and AHDB's view, over a longer period tends to always get a small premium over the non-assured.
No, I hear that, but I think when we're seeing a slight shortage in the market, whether beef or lamb at the moment, no matter what the quality, the demand is such at the minute, it's just phenomenal. But just really touching on the inspections, what can be done to create a greater degree of standardisation of red tractor inspections? Some inspectors apparently take a very hard line, whilst others appear more lenient.
Yeah, good question. Look, that's an area that we've spent an enormous amount of time and effort over the last few years to try to, I hate the word, but almost standardize the inspection. And I hate that, because at the end of the day, inspectors are human beings. And unfortunately, humans are all different and they all have slightly different interpretation. But what we do with our assessors, first, our assessors are all employed by independent certification bodies. Those bodies are also accredited by UCAS, so they are inspected themselves by the United Kingdom Accreditation Services. But when an assessor joins a CB, we, Red Tractor, have a whole program that assessor has got to go through. So they've got an onboarding, they have to take exams, they have to pass those exams, they have to shadow experienced assessors, they have to be witnessed by other assessors before they can go out. So we try to do as much as we possibly can to ensure that that assessor is not only skilled at assessing standards, but is skilled in the personality side of inspection and being able to have a relationship with the farmer or the grower. So we do an enormous amount of work in that area. I completely accept there is still work to do, but I think we all need to remember that ultimately those inspectors are human, and there will be an element of difference, different opinions from a human perspective. But we are, Robert, we hear it loud and clear, and we are trying to take that inconsistency out. I also think, just for interest, every farmer, every grower gets a post-audit survey, completely anonymous, sent to them. At the moment, we get about 12% uptake of that survey, with people coming back. And the survey is designed to get feedback about the assessment, how they felt about the assessor, etc., etc. All I would say is I would encourage any farmer or grower that gets a post-audit survey, please fill it in, because that kind of information and feedback is vital to us to improve that consistency.
No, I hear what you're saying. Thank you for that. You mentioned earlier in your opening remarks how that M&S and Sainsbury's don't work with Red Tractor, and we also mentioned there how if you could find a market for your produce and not be farm assured, well, that's fantastic. But there's no dairy farmer has that option of not being farm assured with Red Tractor, and they just have to be. So the question would be, why do we still need to force milk to be Red Tractor assured? Bearing in mind some of the other milk purchasers in the UK, my milk buyer is Arla, the Arla Garden there, and some would say, well, it's just another duplication, asking the same questions by two different inspectors. But back to the point, well, I can't sell my milk without being farm Red Tractor assured. So why the insistence for Red Tractor for milk?
Yeah, well, again, Robert, it really goes back to almost the very first answer. The fact that the scheme is a very good scheme. It's a comprehensive scheme. It's a scheme that is valued by those end customers, because it effectively does everything that they need doing. It provides their due diligence on everything around welfare, health, traceability, environmental standards, and so on. So we are a victim of our own success by having a strong scheme. All of the processors and indeed retailers and caterers want that Red Tractor. And therefore, if they want the Red Tractor and have made it part of their specification, then effectively the suppliers got to go there. I'll be honest with you, it's the same in almost any category that, if a retailer or a customer has got a specification, you're either going to adhere to that specification and supply them, or find another market. That's the situation, really. Also, Robert, you said fantastic if you can find markets that are for non-assured.
Yeah,
you would say that, you might say that, but all I would say is it should be a business decision by every individual farmer. You may well find that there is actually good premiums to be had on assured lamb or assured beef. So I wouldn't say it was as simple as just look for a non-assured market because it must be better. I don't think that's the case at all.
No, I take that on board. And one thing that regularly comes back to me is that the imports coming into the UK have got to be the same standards that we produce to in the UK. And we've got a comment here saying how New Zealand lamb has market access to the UK. The New Zealand Lamb Assurance Scheme has a 36-month inspection interval. Is there scope for Red Tractor to extend their audit interval to match that of the imports of lamb?
Yeah, I personally, I don't think so. I think we're at 18 months at the moment, and I think that works well when we talk to consumers and when we talk to our customers and such like. I think it's interesting to look at the development of the New Zealand Farm Assurance Scheme. It's a more recent scheme than Red Tractor, but very much modelled on Red Tractor. It's interesting that it already has an environmental module, and about 25% of the throughput is coming through. And I can tell you, if you talk to lots of UK buyers, that's the part that they're very interested in. But also, if you look at AHDB data and you look at the premiums that GB lamb has over New Zealand and Australia, it's pretty substantial. It's all published AHDB data, so it's worth looking at. Now, I know that that global pricing is influenced by a lot of other factors. I know that New Zealand and Australia have much bigger markets, for example, in China or Asia or whatever. But nevertheless, I suppose at the end of the day, Robert, what I would say is, if we wanted to take the standards down to the lowest common denominator, you will only ever compete on price. If you do not give a buyer a good reason to buy something and everything is the same, then if I was a buyer, I'd buy whatever is the cheapest. If New Zealand is the cheapest, that's what I would buy. So I think we've got to remember that we have to give a reason to all the supermarket and caterer buyers as to why they should buy British. The standards are part of that. Red Tractors are part of that. And at the moment, the vast majority buy British first or British only. My worry is that if you start to drop those standards or you allow your competition to come up level with you, then the buyer has much more opportunity to say, I'll buy on price.
No, I hear that. And it's back to our point of what our opening remarks about tonight were. What benefit is Red Tractor to British farmers and growers? And at the end of all that is, it's down to the pounds, shillings and pence. It's what keeps our food on our table. As Tenant, it keeps the roof over our head and allows us to reinvest, hopefully for the future, for the next generation of Tenant members coming through the whole supply chain of land use within the UK. And I'm acutely aware that we are not going to even scratch the surface of all the questions that have been asked for tonight, and just to let everybody know tonight that we mentioned to Jim in the early part of this evening before we came online that any questions we don't get a chance to get an answer tonight, we're going to forward them through Jim's office, and then we're going to get the answers back, and we're going to put them on the website, and we're going to hopefully try to get to as many answers to these questions as we can. And looking at the list of my questions here, I'm kind of down to my last question for this evening, because I'm acutely aware my time and the ability for me to hold another webinar and be held to account for my timekeeping is going to be very short-lived, I would say. And my question is really one I've read today in the Farming Press. It was saying how that the Red Tractor Beef and Lamb Sector Board, they had their meeting this week, and they called for a proposal for a vote of no confidence in the Assurance Scheme executive. Now, do you understand why they have done that?
I haven't seen, well, I haven't had all the detail. We were excluded from any conversation about that, Robert, so I don't know all the details behind it, I'm afraid. So it's difficult for me to comment. I mean, look, I completely understand the frustration of farmers, not just beef and lamb, but all farmers, in terms of, the pressure that they're under. And you mentioned the fairness in the supply chain and the margins that are made. So, I can completely get that. I personally think people are ignoring the value that Red Tractor brings. Just remember, 24 years ago, we didn't have a market in the UK. We didn't have a single export contract. Today, we've got consumers who want to buy Red Tractor assured, they want to buy British first, and we're opening export contracts because of the standards. And I think for people to ignore that just remember the central purpose of Red Tractor is reassuring consumers. Consumer awareness and trust is never higher than it has been today.
No, I hear what you say that, and if anything, people can take that away tonight. Well, that's fantastic. But my final question here, and it's really if George can come in at this point, and just on the back of this question that was raised in the press today regarding the assurance board meeting not having the confidence in the executive team, and the question to me from three members tonight is, does the TFA have confidence in Red Tractor going forwards?
Okay, Robert, bring me in on an easy one. My goodness.
That's what I thought, George. That's what we're here for.
Well, I think in answering that question, Robert, we have to listen to what our members are telling us. Whether the TFA thinks something or not is neither here nor there. It's what our members think, and we are a representative organization at the end of the day, and we must represent our members' interests. And what I'm really grateful to Jim for coming on tonight. Given what he has experienced in the press over the past day, a lesser man would have empty-chaired us tonight, given what he's had to do. So I really do appreciate you coming on, Jim, and being the face of Red Tractor for us tonight. But Red Tractor is a bigger organization than just Jim, and Red Tractor has a board, and Red Tractor has various bits that we need to bring into consideration here. And I think what our members would say, and therefore the view that we need to reflect, is that our members and the TFA doesn't have confidence in Red Tractor. And I think there's probably a number of reasons for that. Firstly, I think people see, as has been discussed tonight, the ratcheting up of standards, apparently at the behest of retailers who aren't prepared to provide sufficient value to the farming industry for that. I think, again, as alluded to tonight, a lack of openness in the way in which Red Tractor goes about its business. It is a voluntary scheme, I get that, but it is one of those schemes which you have to be part of these days in order to be able to trade in a lot of markets. And in some respects, our members would say Red Tractor operates more like a government department in terms of the way in which it does its business behind closed doors, and a bit more openness would be really helpful. I think people also feel that the standards don't make much sense sometimes in relation to what it is consumers are after. Why, for example, why are consumers worried whether I wash my combine or not? That's a flippant answer, you might say, but there is a bit of a disconnect. But I think fundamentally, our members would forgive all of that. They would forgive all of that if Red Tractor could demonstrate that there was value to them in terms of the insurance standards that they are having to adhere to. If they could see that those billions of pounds of retail spend that has the Red Tractor logo is supporting their businesses, supporting their families, supporting them day to day, providing them with a fair return, they would forgive all of that stuff because they would see the benefit to them, to their individual businesses. And until Red Tractor, in my view, is able to demonstrate that, we will continue to lack confidence in the assurance scheme.
No, thanks for that, George. And it seems quite an able point for us to close at this time. So for me, for my housekeeping roles tonight, I'd like to thank Jim for coming along and talking to us all and answering as many of the questions as I could get through the list tonight. I also like to thank our sponsors this evening, Roythorn Solicitors, and look forward to their sponsorship through the rest of the coming 12 months. And our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, the 29th of May, and that is titled, What Difference Will the New Code of Practice Make to Landlord-Tenant Relationships in Agriculture? And our speakers that evening will be Matthew Morris and Charles Cope. So On behalf of the TFA this evening, I'd like to thank you all for joining and logging next time. So thanks for your time and good night.